It is no longer now. The assertion that customers are paying enough to the airlines is wrong, for the simple reason that Indian carriers, many of them, are today doing 80-85% occupancy factor and yet not being able to recover their cost of operation. Globally, if an airline does 70-75% occupancy factor, they break even and make a marginal surplus, clearly indicating that the conditions of operation by airlines in India is not conducive for profit making. And once you do not make profits for a long period or sustain losses for a long period, well, you will reach a situation what Kingfisher has reached today. And if the government fails to attend to these problems, the systemic problems now, perhaps you may have a few more carriers joining the ranks in the 6-8 months that will follow. So therefore, there is an urgent need for the government to take note of. It is not to take note of for Kingfisher, but for the industry as a whole, so that systemic corrections take place before much damage is done.
Systemic corrections. Yes, Suhel Seth wanted to come in. Ashwini, after that, please. Suhel Seth, your response to the consumer argument.
I loved Mr. Misra's kindergarten business logic that, oh, because we've invested as consumers in buying Kingfisher beer must support. You know, companies are not run like musical chairs. Kingfisher Airlines is a listed separate entity. It is trademark extension, and there's nothing wrong with trademark extensions. They happen across the world. I mean, I want him to understand that EasyJet is one such example. They're also in cruise liners, they're also in airlines. Let's come to the moot point, Arnab. You are using the word bailout. You are using the word bailout. Is it a bailout? Is it the same thing as Air India? It isn't. Because this money, if the banks agree to lend Vijay Mallya money, Vijay Mallya will have to pay it back with interest. So there is no bailout. What there is emergency funding, as we've seen, even in the American situation post the Lehman Brothers crash, what they did with TARP funding. So let's examine the realities without getting all mushy and over-sentimental.
Okay.
The reality is as follows, Arnab, and you will play a pioneering role if you allow this country to understand the issues. Issue one, we have a warped civil aviation policy. This only is reflective in the state of affairs of private airlines. Number two, we continue to have government double-speak. You either have a free market or you don't. You can't be partially pregnant. Number three, Kingfisher, don't knock great brands when they go through a dip in their life cycle, because you will be doing the worst service to business entrepreneurship as a whole. My request to you would be, and through you to others would be, understand the problems, that they are systemic. This particular child now suffers from an affliction because you haven't been able to control the disease. You haven't vaccinated this sector. As long as you don't do that, you will continue to have many more children.
My question is simply tonight. I take your point. I take your point. You say there's no bailout, and Kingfisher Airlines gave me a statement as I was going into the show. And they said, we know you're doing a show on this subject today. We want to tell you what our point of view is, and I'm putting their point of view out. 1 minute. They say Kingfisher has not made any bailout request to the government. We have only asked our banks for an increase in limits due to significant increase in operating costs caused by increase in fuel prices and rupee devaluation. So they are saying this is not a bailout. No, 1 minute. Arnab, the question is tonight, would the banks be lending otherwise?
Nobody.
Would the banks, as a normal practice, be lending otherwise?
See, Arnab, the key issue is
Ashwini Kakkar, yes.
Creditors.
See, it is a structural issue. If 20 airlines are going bankrupt, then the government is clearly doing a lot of structural things wrong. You know, and first of all, that structural thing has to be improved. Now, if you...
No, 1 minute.
Also, the other point I want to make is that Mr. Misra is saying, see, nobody is asking for a bailout. For example, we are saying allow that 25% foreign equity. You know, there are still be 200 investors who will be willing to put money. Different airlines will be willing to put money. Apart from this, if the real cost is established, if five more of our airlines go bust,
Is the government? No, I find this. No, you're saying let foreign investors come in. No, 1 minute. Let are foreign investors deciding whether to come in or not based upon whether business models work or not? I mean,
No, it's not even allowed. Foreign equity is not allowed.
No, 1 second.
Foreign airlines are not being allowed.
Let me tell you, Arnab, let me give you the history, please, for a minute. When the Tatas wanted to ink a deal with Singapore Airlines, there was a lot of pressure put by various quarters, and that deal was thwarted. Ever since then, we have never clarified foreign direct investment in the civil aviation sector. It has even affected an airline of Air India's stature. Look at what Air India has done with its alliance building. It has failed in its alliance building for so many years because it hasn't been able to offer the kind of scale and size that you require. These are serious civil aviation issues. I'm glad that we are getting this wake-up call.
This is a free market, Suhel. Suhel, you're making Kingfisher Airlines out to be the government of India's responsibility. No, one second. Will Kingfisher Airlines
suppose Times now not run a program? Why is Times now not running a program against those airlines today, including Air India, that are charging 53,000 rupees for a business class return between Delhi and Calcutta?
No, 1 minute.
That, to my mind, is abominable.
1 minute. If there was so much concern for the consumer, then would 100 flights be also cancelled by Kingfisher? You see, there are multiple issues here, Suhel.
You're absolutely right.
There are multiple issues. You're running a business.
You are right, the consumer was not taken into confidence. The consumer was treated shabbily. There you are right, and your point is absolutely well taken. There must and should be consumer sensitivity, and I think by not informing consumers and doing it last minute,
Captain Gopinath, I'm coming back to the other side, Mohammed Salim, right after this. This is an interesting debate. Captain Gopinath.
And what I want to say is that, of course, there are some of the problems of Kingfisher are brought about by their own actions. I mean, that is very evident. You know, but that is the reason I said that it should not be a bailout for Kingfisher. The government doesn't have a strategic vision for aviation for the last 50 years. You know, every civil aviation minister promised one, no civil aviation policy, a strategic vision as to what kind of aviation should India have. Today we have only 3% of India flying by air. 97% are still traveling by train. Last year we sold only 50 million tickets for a population of 1.2 billion. So obviously the business model of Vijay Mallya is wrong. He's got a great product, he's got a great brand, he's got a great service. So the growth can only come in a low-cost model. All over the world it is the low-cost airlines which are making money. Indigo has made 700 crores profit. But having said that, our policies have always been policies for Air India, policies for Jet Airways, policies for that's exactly so. You can't bail out Kingfisher per se. Absolutely.
Captain Gopinath, do you believe in the low-cost model? Captain Gopinath, do you still believe today in the low-cost model? Do you still believe in it?
Absolutely. Even today, you know, Indigo is in profit. EasyJet is in profit, Ryanair is in profit, Southwest Airlines is in profit. They're all low-cost airlines. AirAsia is in profit. But what I'm saying is that the problems of...
Should the government say, therefore, Captain Gopinath, my follow-up question to you is, should the government then say, okay, we know you are in trouble, we will ask the banks to extend a helping hand to you, but here are some conditions, strings attached with it, which we believe will serve the people better. Or would you then say no, you will need to extend help, but you cannot have any strings attached to it?
But
I think
Captain Gopinath.
See, I think, you know, if you individually try to help Kingfisher, the problem will be you're creating unfair playing field for the other successful airlines. So therefore, whatever needs to be done, because Kingfisher is too big to fail, in the sense that the debt is so huge, and they're all bank money and the public money. Therefore, the government is concerned now as to how to save this. But as all others said, including Suhel Seth, who is appearing to, support Kingfisher, but I think what everybody is saying is that the government cannot make policies for individual airlines.
I'm saying
or individual private players.
I'm putting it here. I don't think Suhel is appearing to speak for Kingfisher. Suhel is speaking for Kingfisher. Suhel, I'd like to very clearly say, has been associated with the launch of Kingfisher, and he has a deep... I think we are putting that out as a disclosure if it's necessary.
I'm a dear friend of Vijay Mallya's, and I'm delighted that he's produced a great brand. And I'm delighted that he's produced a great brand, and I'm open about both my past association and enduring friendship.
Now here's
nothing to hide. I've said this clearly, that there are systemic issues which Gopinath is also aware of. When Gopinath sold his airline to Mallya, even Air Deccan wasn't profitable. It wasn't profitable. So Mr. Mishra's contention that Air Deccan was profitable is again unfounded.
My question is...
Arnab, what you've said today is enough of the...
Does anyone...
The consumer in India...
Arnab,
the consumer in India...
The consumer in India also wants to know whether his banks are stable, Suhel. Whether his banks are stable.
Sure.
No.
No, 1 minute. 1 minute. 1 minute. Let me complete. Let me complete.
The consumer will have to pay 30,000 rupees for one journey.
So 1 minute. That's like blackmail.
Loss-making airlines.
That will be blackmail. That will be blackmail to say 30,000 rupees for one journey.
If the next 5 airlines flop tomorrow, what do you think is going to happen?
So tell me, Ashwini Kakkar. Ashwini Kakkar, as a business person, tell me one thing.
Mayawati, they will make, instead of Mayawati, they will erect statues of you, Arnab, if you are able to run a sustained campaign against some of those airlines that today are charging high rates, which are actually, I mean, they're...
No. What's digressing? Suhel, you're making a determined attempt to digress. My question is simple. Mohammed Salim, what about the increased risk to banks and account holders who will be forced to extend lending limits and appear to be flexible when the government is saying regulate banks? This is the strength of the Indian economy. That we don't support profligacy.
This is what happening in the European countries. As these 3 European countries, the problem of the private entrepreneurs, the businessmen, their business models failed, their managements failed, and you pass on the failure to the banks, and then government owes the responsibility, and in turn then it will be converted to the risk to the public. So actually, when Mallya failed, you converted this failure into the failure of the bank, and then compelled the bank to pass it on to the other consumers, the depositors, all the taxpayers of the government of India.
No, simple question.
You asked for the open sky policy. You asked for the competition. They came in the competition. It was their own decision, their own business projection, their own business proposition. Why should now I pay? Why should the bank pay? Bank in turn is the public money, is the government of India, from the taxpayers' money. When bank loses, government has to
Suhel, hear the other side, Suhel.
So this is a very wrong position, and when it is failure, now you say systematic.
Hear the other side.
Then try to address the system. Then don't go case by case, as Gopinath says.
Yeah, and lot of viewers, I must say, are calling in tonight and SMSing. I put two questions. Two questions. One viewer says, how is Indigo then successful? B, if it's such a big structural problem, how is Indigo successful? One, they have a business model, they put it in place in the same competitive climate. Second point tonight which is being made is, the same oil companies which are increasing petrol prices and saying we have no alternative, are continuing to give credit to Kingfisher and many other airlines. Is this fair on the Aam Aadmi who pays for petrol prices? One second, Suhel, I know you want to rebut, but I'm going first to Bejon Misra.
I want to react. Arnab.
Yes, Bejon.
Yeah. Arnab, I pay the fuel in full.
Yes.
And with my money, I do not know where he uses that, and he doesn't pay the oil companies. You see, I am very clear. A kindergarten person wants to teach that brand builder of the corporates that he makes money out of an airline, and when the consumer who has paid for that airline, and when we want to ensure that the industry grows in a very systematic, in a very competitive manner, because you see, we as consumers always encourage government to bring in competition, and we were the one who told the government to dismantle in terms of big monopoly like Air India and bring in private players into the business. We encouraged the government to do that, and that is only because we wanted to bring in good ethical practices in the business. Now what is this ethics that you take money for fuel and you don't pay the fuel supplier? What kind of a business model is this? And this is what we as consumers get alarmed and puzzled when we find people defending. At the end of the day, a bank depositor gets a measly 4% on the deposit, and you here going about lending money and trying to take money at 12% from the borrower and give a measly 4% to the depositor. What kind of a banking system is this in a country? So we need to understand that the banks needs to have reforms, the aviation industry needs to have reforms. I fully agree that we have been always telling the government that the regulator has to come in a real regulatory mechanism and ensure that the industry grows.
He has a point.
Ensure
Good
that
point.
there is a strict monitoring and evaluation
Good point
process
being made.
in place so that the consumers are made to pay a realistic price, and not an unrealistic price just to get that number on board in terms of its capacity.
Good point. Good point. Would anyone like to rebut?
But we want flights which are realistic, economical, doesn't get cancelled, and the consumers are not harassed in their day-to-day life.
Getting rebuts. Ashwini Kakkar, 1 minute. Suhel, before I come to you, Ashwini Kakkar wants to respond. Ashwini Kakkar, point here is business models. Business models. The theory of business models is you scale up according to performance, according to the success of your brand, right? That's the basis of any business model.